Marion, and well, to everybody, welcome to this U3A chat about electric vehicles and the future of electricity. I was tremendously encouraged by the number of people that wanted to come and listen to this and view the slides that I prepared. So that's a very good sign, because I was a bit nervous that there might not be enough of you to that be interested, but it seems to be a very current interest issue. I just wanted to say a big thank you to Marion and to Roy for making all this possible and helping me with the IT side to make sure that all this goes smoothly. So we can dive into it in a minute. Also, just to give you a very quick picture postcard of who I am, so that you know I haven't all looked it up in Wikipedia and passing it on to you from there. I'm a Dutch national. I was born in Holland and brought up there, and I studied automotive engineering in Holland, and I specialized in internal combustion chamber architecture. It's a very expensive word for what happens inside the combustion chamber of an engine. And inevitably that led me to go into motorsport, because in motor racing you're always looking for higher and better efficiencies. And so I became involved in motorsport, building racing engines and designing them for people. And in the end, in 1970, I decided to come to England, where I met my wife, Patricia, and set up a business building and racing engines. And then later on, we built our own cars. And I did that from 1970 until 1986. And then I decided that I'd had enough of going around in circles all the time, and that I had been a gross polluter, spending a lot of time wasting carbon and using carbon very profligately, if that's the right word. I was looking around for really, you know, the next challenge, if you like, and began to become quite interested in renewable energy, and particularly initially in electrical machines, because if you look at an engine today, a typical car engine in your vehicle may be about, say, 37, perhaps even 38% efficient. But an electric motor, a really good electric motor, can already today be 94% efficient. So, you know, that was a very, very big step up from where I was with engines. So in that process, I came into contact with people that were working in the industry, and we began to work together with Sheffield University, and through that medium met up with people who were much more focused on the renewable energy industry. And of course, at that time, in the early 90s, rather, should I say, the first fuel cells were being mentioned, and hydrogen was being mentioned as the new future fuel. And we got involved in that with my company, and that culminated in me in 2005, setting up a fuel cell factory here in Dunsfold here in Surrey, and taking that company to the stock market in 2008, I think it was. And then since that time, the share price is not where I like it to be, but you know, it's still very much going and doing well. But since that time, have also then become involved with solar, because the renewable energy space really is a much more integrated energy transfer space, and we can talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. In any event, that's a bit of my career, and I became involved with Brighton Energy Cooperative 4 years ago, and we're now, if you like, progressing with that company from the previously FIT-based, the feed-in tariff-based solar applications to a much more open energy transfer plan to try and use more of the available renewable energy systems and mediums. So that's where we are today. And in that process, of course, electric vehicles plays a big role, because even with hydrogen cars, hybrid cars, and battery electric cars, they are all driven by an electrical motor and an electric motor controller. And that sparked my interest. I built my first electric vehicle in 1994. And indeed, in 1998, I built the very first fuel cell taxi in London as a prototype, and drove around London happily in a zero-emission car, occasionally picking up passengers illegally because they couldn't believe that it wasn't a real taxi. So electric vehicles is very much focused in my history, but I've also been a petrol head. There's no doubting that, and I still do love the engines and the way they can, you know, give people pleasure in the classic cars, for example. So, you know, we've lived through an age where vehicles are very, very polluting when you look at the total picture, and electric vehicles and electricity in particular, now that we're needing to decarbonize our world, are one part of the solution. It's not all the solution. There are lots of other things that need to happen, but electric vehicles is a very good step forward for two very clear reasons. One is that an electric vehicle, irrespective of where the energy comes from, does not locally pollute. So you can sit in your electric vehicle and you are not wafting exhaust gases everywhere. And the second reason is why it's a good thing is that the total carbon commitment that has been made in building the vehicle is already today much lower than a current non-electric vehicle would represent. And that's important because in the future we're going to have to look at the amount of carbon that we have to invest in making anything, houses, central heating, cars, bikes, everything will have a carbon balance that we begin to look at now when it's being made and when it's being used and when it's being disposed of. So as it says there, it's the presentation, all your EV questions answered, but in addition, I've also at the bottom of the presentation given a flavor of the kind of things that are coming in the future in terms of the use of electricity and the way in which we can all benefit from that. So without much ado, we'll carry on. And we're going to start with a little bit of EV history. Then we'll move on to what are hybrids, what about them? EVs, hybrids, fuel cell, hydrogen vehicles, and just explain a little bit about, you know, how they work and what they are, and also what they represent in terms of the future and how they would be sitting in that future. Just like we now have, for example, petrol engines, diesel engines, we have cars that can run on LPG, we have cars that can run on natural gas. It's not dissimilar to that. Then we'll move on to what kind of EV cars you can buy today and what they currently represent in terms of their price and their range, etc. And some of these features. Then we'll talk a little bit about what's coming in the future, what shortly is going to become available for us to buy. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the topics that surround electric vehicles in particular, such as range anxiety, you know, will my battery let me down, etc. Then an often asked question is, will the national grid cope? Lots of people say, well, you know, what happens if everybody gets an electric car? You know, will we be able to supply the energy for that? And then the next one is it really green? You know, what happens with this energy and how do we get access to it? And is that really a very green way of transporting ourselves? And then the next one on the EVs anyway is what are the downsides? Just like there are advantages with these vehicles, there are also downsides that I think everybody ought to be aware of so that you can make an informed judgment as to whether that suits you or not. And then finally, I've just put a little bit of some pictures in there to show you what is possible with green energy in the future, arrangements and systems that we can currently already see can be employed to help us become more carbon neutral and in fact saving carbon as well. And then finally, a little bit on what the future may look like once we have these things more in place, say beyond 2035, 2040, what that would look like. Oop. And so, here, not quite sure. I don't seem to be able to get the slide. Here we go. Okay, so A battery electric vehicle is essentially a battery pack, the big green bit at the bottom there, usually placed in the bottom of the car because it's heavy, it takes up space. So by putting it in the floor of the car, many cars now have this particular layout. You make the weight sit low, that's good for the car stability and handling, and it allows the floor of the car to be a useful part of the structure rather than just sitting there to put your feet on. Then you have a controller, an electric motor and a controller, which allows you to control that electric motor and how fast it will run and how much energy you put into it. You then have a regenerative braking system on board. That means that as you let go of the accelerator pedal, the car will slow down, but some of that energy, as it is slowing down, is captured and put back into the battery to give you a greater range. That's an important feature of modern cars now. And it's also particularly important because what you will notice if you drive an electric vehicle for the very first time, the regeneration, when you let go of the throttle pedal, means that the car will slow down more than you're used to with a standard vehicle. But once you're used to that, then you can also gauge very easily as you approach junctions, and it becomes much simpler. This particular method of recapturing energy also makes it very benign on things like tire wear and brake pads. For example, brake pad life, for example, goes up nearly 70%. So by way of example, the typical replacement cycles for brake pads are between sort of 35 and 40,000 miles. With most people that live in urban environments, that is almost doubled on an electric vehicle, and so a big saving there. And tire life too improves. And then finally, on the same picture, you see there the little cable that goes into the battery pack through which it is the battery is charged. So if I can have the next slide, please. Okay. So then we're talking about hybrid vehicles. Now, there is a lot of information available on hybrids. And what a lot of people don't realize is that there are two types of hybrid. This gets a little bit technical, but bear with me, it's not too technical. The two types that are there are the parallel hybrid and the series hybrid. In the parallel hybrid, for example, a Toyota Prius, you have essentially an internal combustion engine. And that engine is connected to an electric motor. There's a clutch in between. And it has a battery pack that is being charged by this electrical machine that's on the end of the engine. But the salient point here is that the internal combustion engine in a parallel hybrid is always connected to the wheel. So it's always driving the car. Whether it's electrically assisted or not, the engine is always driving the car. Next slide, please. Did we get that? Yeah. So in a series hybrid, like for example in fuel cell vehicles, what physically happens is you have an electric motor and a battery pack, just like a normal standard battery vehicle. But you have on board either a small engine with a generator that recharges the battery, or you have a fuel cell that recharges that battery. But at no point in the arrangement is the internal combustion engine driving any of the wheels. The internal engine is just driving a generator. Everything else is electrically motivated. So that's the difference between the two. And the importance of that is that the series hybrid vehicle tends to be much more expensive because you need a great many more bits, and they are much more suitable to inner city work. They are not so suitable for motorway driving and long distance driving. Although these things are being improved all the time, that is still true today. Next one. Oh, is that the right one? Yeah. So I hope that was reasonably clear. And so let's have a look now at today's offerings. What can you buy today for electric vehicles? As you can see, it's quite a list now. And in fact, next year, there will be at least as many again on the market for you to choose from. All the cars that you can see here have more than 150-mile range. And the average mileage today that people travel is, in Britain anyway, is about, say, around about 10,000, 11,000 miles and below that. And about 80% of people that travel that sort of distance only actually travel mostly 35 miles a day. So you can see that really 150 miles is a pretty useful range for an electric vehicle to do almost everything you might want to do with the car. So if we look at the range there, and we just start from the top, a Tesla Model S, which is quite an expensive car today, the later models can already achieve 402 miles on a full charge in the more expensive top of the range model. But even the Renault Zoe, a lovely, really nice car that you can buy today for £27,000, it can do 225 miles. So as you see, that's already a very, very useful miles for longer journeys. And one of the things that is worth mentioning in this context is that if you have the capacity to charge your vehicle at home, then you will hardly ever need external charging, because if you have a range of 225 miles and you charge it overnight at home, it will be full the next morning. And so you might go a whole week without ever having to recharge it again. If you go on a longer journey and you need to travel, let's say 400 miles, you need to find a place where you can recharge the car. And that's where today's choices become more critical. So if you look at electric vehicles today, rather like with internal combustion cars, things are developing all the time. We are, in fact, at the bottom of the ladder when it comes to technology. So the earlier electric cars had two downsides. One was that they often didn't have the range. So a typical range was 60 to 80 miles, and that slowly crept up to 100 and then 120. But the other Achilles heel that many of these older cars have is that you cannot fast charge them along the way. So that if you came to a certain point of, let's say you're at the end of your 120-mile range, then you would be sitting there for an hour or three, four, if you wanted to have another full charge. So that is, you need to plan your journey. And to many people, it doesn't matter. If you're not in a hurry, it doesn't matter. You can just, have a walk around, have a cup of coffee, have a look at the place you're charging at, and you carry on a journey. But if you are, if you are prepared to pay a little more and look at a more modern car, modern electric cars, most of them now will be able to charge at 50 kilowatt per hour or more. In fact, current Teslas and Porsches can charge at 250 kilowatt per hour, making it possible to recharge the car in about 18 to 22 minutes. So by the time you drunk a cup of coffee, your phone app will chime and tell you that the car is fully charged and ready to go again. But the point about this is, and why I'm mentioning this is, if you're choosing a new car, an electric car, and you know that you're making regular longer journeys, then it is more important to choose one where faster charging is allowed. So then the other issue, of course, is, okay, well, where do I charge my electric car? And today, as we speak, there are already 35,500 publicly available electric charging points, varying from 7 kilowatt units right up to 200 kilowatt units. Now, just to put that in context with you, the number of petrol stations in this country currently is about 26,700. So we have already overtaken the number of petrol stations that are available to people. But of course, you need many more posts to charge a lot of cars. So you will find that we will need probably around 150,000 posts publicly available at high charging rates in order to satisfy everybody's demand for on the road electricity. And this is completely doable. It's not a big problem. And we can explain a little bit more about that later on. Let me just go now. So, okay. So then we move on to the next one, which is, you know, the more current cars. And what you see there is the Chevrolet Bolt, sorry, the Nissan Leaf, the later version, and the Kia Niro and the Hyundai. And these are all cars that have 200 plus miles of range, can all fast charge, and therefore are much more suitable for longer journeys and taking multiple passengers along the way. Next one. So what can we look forward to? Well, there are going to be some very, very interesting new cars now coming to our shores. The BMW iX3 will be the very first fully electric, electric-only BMW, roughly the size of a 3 Series, as it says there. This vehicle supersedes the current the i3, because the i3 is fully electric, but the i3 can also be had in hybrid configuration. Then there will be the Tesla Cybertruck, a crazy vehicle, but nevertheless it is an important milestone, if you like, in electric vehicles, because it's a working truck. It will be able to do 400 plus miles. It can pull 15,000 tons of load. If you were to want to pull a train, you can do that with it. The VW ID.3, that's a really interesting one now. VW, as you know, went through a period where they were subject to an investigation because of the Dieselgate scandal in America that also then came to our shores. And as a result of that, the board of the company was dismissed. A new board was appointed, and they immediately set about looking at the electrification of their company. And the Volkswagen ID.3 is the first example of that. It's roughly Golf size, slightly bigger than a Golf. Again, it will have a very high range. You can purchase it with a series of battery packs, I think starting at something like 45 kilowatt, 60 kilowatt, 85 kilowatt. And for those of you that don't know this, but the kilowatt rating is an indication of how much energy can be packed into the battery pack, and consequently, the higher the kilowatt rating, the higher the vehicle's range will be in general. Then we have the Polestar 2, that's the smaller Volvo. That's roughly the size of a small Range Rover, Land Rover rather, sorry. And very similar, in fact, to the Tesla Model Y, which is the new SUV from Tesla. Ford Motor Company have also now come into the fray with a Ford Mustang. These are all the new vehicles coming, but on top of that, in the last 3 months, we've seen another 19 different players that are going to be selling vehicles in this country in the next 2 years. So it's really, really happening. The other thing that we can look forward to is, as I mentioned before, but it is worth mentioning again, is we are seeing more and more stations now along the motorways and even in town where faster charging is possible. And this is important for 2 reasons. One is, obviously, as you go along your way and you want to visit family, you don't want to hang around too much if you have little time. So faster charging will help that situation a lot. But the other reason why faster charging, even in the urban area, is so important is for those people that do not have off-road parking and that have to rely on their car sitting by the side of the road, and the next day they may well want a full charge in order to go about their business, and they would then, in a manner of speaking, be handicapped. So by having fast charging stations in the urban area, you can then, just like you go to a petrol station now, go onto the fast charger, 20 minutes later, maybe half an hour later, you will have a full charge and you can get on your way. So those are also now on the way. The councils are beginning to recognize that putting charge posts in lamp posts is all very well, and that is perfectly happy for somebody who has the time, but that's not a solution for a block of flats with, say, 150 owners, of which half of them have vehicles sitting below in the car park. You know, you need to have fast charging near you, just like you have petrol stations near you now. Then we're seeing a great expansion of the big green energy grid. So up until recently, for example, in the Brighton Energy Co-op, if we had a system on an industrial roof that was, let's say, 150 kilowatt or 250 kilowatt in capacity output, today it's very normal to see companies engaging with the utilities and building 50 megawatt solar fields, or now that the restrictions on land wind generators has been eased, to have land-based energy generation in the region of, again, 50, 60 megawatt at the time. So these things are coming, and it helps to make the energy. Oh, something's happening there. I think somebody needs to be on mute. Anyway, so all these things are happening, and they are to the good. We have seen in the last 8 years a tremendous increase in green energy, and because you can contract to have green energy, even when you are taking it from different places, you are then buying green energy and displacing carbon-heavy energy and fuels. We're also then looking at a very important part, and I'll touch upon it a bit later on as well, at wider operating temperatures. Batteries are notoriously poor, particularly in the beginning of the technology, in being able to operate in cold temperatures. Cold weather is not good for batteries. They don't work efficiently in the cold weather. But with the later technologies, you will see that effect has been minimized a lot. But it is nevertheless the case that if you had a 150-mile radius or a 200-mile radius in your electric vehicle, in the winter, you can reckon that if the temperatures fall below -5 degrees C, the range will drop by 15 to 20%. So it's something that in the winter you need to be aware of. But new battery technologies are on the way, luckily, already as we speak. 2 new technologies have been announced in May of this year that have shown great improvements in the ability to deliver energy at very low temperatures. So that's in the pipeline. It is coming. And then, of course, the final one is longer driving ranges. Battery technology is really improving at an unbelievable pace. I get almost every week 5 or 6 news feeds from the technology centers that I'm in contact with, who are announcing yet better and greater density battery cell capacities. And I can tell you that in 2010, if we were buying lithium-ion batteries, they would be giving something like 120 watt-hours per kilogram. Already today, that's only 9 years later, you can buy batteries every day at 225 watt-hours per kilogram, so double the capacity, and therefore or half the weight. And very shortly, we will be seeing the first beta versions of 425 watt-hours per kilogram batteries. That means that for a battery pack that today will weigh something like 200 kilos, suddenly that battery pack will only weigh 100 kilos and much cheaper to buy. So these are things that are really happening today and are big advances in the technology towards electric vehicles becoming more commonplace and more easy to live with when compared with, say, 4 or 5 years ago and today. So I've picked out a couple of current ones. I'm not being paid by Hyundai or whoever, or any of them, in fact. But I thought I'll just show you a couple of the ones here. It's typical with a 258-mile range, fast charging. It's an excellent vehicle, travel long distances as well as in town. And one of the things that is really remarkable about electric vehicles, and I just wanted to pass on to you, is that with an electric vehicle, you will find that one, it's much quieter, it's more peaceful to drive, and particularly at a distance. It is not generally recognized, but noise in a vehicle is a factor in driver tiredness and driver concentration levels. So the lower your noise level in the car, the background noise in particular, the more peaceful driving is. And we can talk a little bit about that later on. Now, I said I wouldn't use abbreviations. I've used one here. It's no more internal combustion engines. This is the range of Renault vehicles now that are today available to everyone, and already includes, as you can see, 6 models in the range, virtually covering from an SUV right down to a 2-person inner city urban vehicle, ranging from 38,000 right down to about 11,500 pounds. So that's a response to the manufacturers recognizing that it is no longer viable for them to just make petrol engines and diesel engines, particularly diesels specifically, because they are much more polluting at the lower levels and in urban environments. And just a little word about that. Diesel engines, of course, are very efficient when compared with petrol engines, and certainly have proven themselves to be very fuel efficient. However, what has not been recognized, and there has been a deliberate, hence the Volkswagen Dieselgate scandal, there has been a very deliberate attempt to underplay the effects of diesel engines' particulate matter. And as diesel engines became more and more efficient, the size of the particles in the particulate matter became smaller and smaller and smaller, to the point where the particulate matter average size fell below 20 micron. Now, 20 micron is smaller than a hair, and these particulates fly into the air. And unfortunately for us human beings, our lungs only filter down to 20 micron. Anything smaller than 20 micron goes straight into the bloodstream. And that is why in urban environments, with diesel engines so heavily promoted, you see a lot more cases of asthma, and all the pollution levels at between 45 and 55 centimeters from the ground tend to be much, much higher because they congregate there. And so children, because they're small, they suck up more of that pollution than us adults. So that is why it is really important that we get rid of the diesels, because they are simply too dangerous in the urban environment for the long-term health of people. I've lost my ability to. Can you change the slide, please? Okay. No. No. Here we go. Yeah, here we go. So yeah, I just mentioned the Ford Mustang, and the reason is quite simple. It's many of the car manufacturers have been quite slow picking up on what an electric vehicle can do for them and their image, and have come into the game late. However, because they came into the game late, Ford Motor Company decided they were going to compete head-on with the top of the capacity that currently is available in the better cars. And so this new Ford Mustang, unlike its predecessor in the internal combustion field, is an SUV again. I think we have to live with SUVs for a while. And this has 370-mile range. And you can buy one already today and order one for £40,000. And of course, you may realize that you will be able to get a £3,000 grant towards buying such a new vehicle today from our current government. There is some pressure on the government now to increase that to £5,000 to accelerate the uptake of electric vehicles. But that's a white paper at the moment. It hasn't gone through yet. So can't say that it's going to happen necessarily, but it's looking better than 2 years ago. So the next one is, as you know, in the UK here, Jaguar has been very proactive, and the I-Pace, it is an expensive car, but it too has a near 300-mile range, is extremely comfortable, holds the road very, very well, and would certainly be a very good choice if you're in that price bracket. Again, the same discount, sorry, the same grant would apply to this car as well. Then finally, the current leader in the sales of electric vehicles, Tesla sell many more cars than most of the current ones combined, in fact. But that's because they had a big advantage in recognizing very early on that the way to build an electric vehicle, to design and build it, is to begin from scratch and not take the older technology into account and convert an older car into an electric vehicle, but start from the ground up. And they had the wise decision that they would also collaborate with and design batteries specific for this purpose, which was a big step forward, because it means that they have control over their energy source, their energy transfer, and the motor technology, as well as the bodywork and the rest of the components. It's given them a lead to such an extent now that in 8 countries today, the Model 3 electric vehicle is outselling all the IC-based, the internal combustion engine-based models in its class. And in Norway, in fact, now the number of electric vehicles sold in this particular sector and the Model S represents nearly 42% of the whole of the annual sales. So it's a huge increase. Of course, they have a lot of hydropower, so green power. They're very environmentally focused, and the government is actively pushing hard to get people to get rid of their internal combustion engine cars and adopt the electric vehicles. Okay, so then we come to the questions that everybody's always asking. Well, what happens if I run out of juice on the motorway or anywhere else? Well, up to 2 years ago, that would have been a much bigger problem than it is today. Both the AA and the RAC have now currently still small fleets of vehicles with onboard fast output generators. They generate about 20 kilowatt hours on board. And so if you get stranded on the motorway, one of these vans will come to you and will give you a roughly 20-mile instantaneous range boost. That is to say, if your vehicle is capable of fast charging. If you have a slow charging vehicle, it will still be fine, but it will take maybe 3/4 of an hour before you will have sufficient charge to get back to the next charging point. It's of course a little bit, it takes a bit longer than if you run out of fuel. However, it is improving, and the RAC told me 3 weeks ago that they have some new technology coming along today that will make it possible to equip more of their vans with a smaller, higher output generator to get people on the way even faster than today. So, you know, the threat that existed in the past, where if you ran out of juice, you really would be stranded, and the only way off the road would be to be, you know, put on a low loader and then be driven somewhere. That's largely gone. In particular the last 8 months, it has improved dramatically. Well, I just thought I'd give you a quick picture of mine and tell you a little bit about some of these experiences. This is my second one. This one I've had now for 3 years. It's a Tesla Model S 85. It means it has an 85 kilowatt battery pack. It has on average around 250 miles range. And the big positive with this particular way of building electric cars is that they are incredibly reliable. As it says on the slide there, this car has never been inside a garage for anything other than my first set of tires, which was at 62,000 miles, so quite recently. And it has never had any brake pads or any. It's never broken down, and it's overall the cost of operating it is orders of magnitude lower than my previous Audi. That was an Audi Le Mans A6, and I've saved in those 3 years. If I'd done the same mileage with my diesel Audi, I would have had to pay £18,550 in fuel costs. And to put that in perspective, that whole distance of 63,000 miles has cost me £2,350 in fuel cost, if you like. I have a charger downstairs in my garage. It's a 7 kilowatt charger. It's more than enough. A 7 kilowatt charger, by the way, from a company called Pot Point. It's a UK company, London-based, will give you about 20 to 23 miles per hour of charge. So if you plug it in at night when you arrive home, the next morning the battery will be full, and you're on your way again. You never have to look at the inside of a petrol station again. So my experience, obviously, I've been all over the place with this car: Germany, France, Belgium, Holland, so Austria. There are no limitations now, whereas 4 years ago you had to be really careful that you understood where the charging points were and plan your route. Now, in this country anyway, I don't even plan the route anymore. The car internally tells me where the charging posts are. As I get near the charging post, particularly the Tesla network, it tells me how many people are on the chargers, how long they'll be there for, and by the time I get there, I know where I'm at, and I have a cup of coffee, have a wander around, and before I know it, I can get on my way again. So it's become a lot more user-friendly than it was, say, even 4 years ago. Things are changing fast. Okay. The other bit, what are the downsides? It's important to make these points. Your insurance will probably go up a bit, and that is because the ability to repair electric vehicles is to some extent limited to those people in the repair shops that are able and trained to work with high voltage electrical systems. Your normal car has a 12-volt electrical system. That's the normal voltage in the battery. An electric vehicle has a 12-volt battery for all the subsidiary services, but the drive system is usually anywhere between 412 volts nominal upwards to 660 volts in some vehicles. So that is not to be trifled with. It can be extremely dangerous if handled in the wrong way. So these cars cannot just go into any old body shop, because if they make the wrong move, they could hurt themselves quite badly and cause all sorts of mayhem. So that is why it will always be, at least at the moment, a little bit more expensive. And typically, I've compared now 4 different companies. It varies between 10 and 12% more for the electric vehicle. You will spend a bit more time along the way. So if you were to compare a full tank of petrol or diesel in your car and you go on the way today, you can probably do about 500 miles if you drive gently, 600. That's without interruption, not currently possible, but as we mentioned before, that is coming. It's not long. I think by 2025-26, the first of the 600-mile range vehicles will become generally available to the public for purchase. If the car breaks down, that's another downside. Not everyone can fix it, because again, you cannot allow just any old mechanic to play with the high voltage system. So you have to have a dedicated guy that comes to you, or if that's not possible, you will have to get somebody to tow the car off the road and take it to a maintenance center where they can deal with it. However, I would point out that, of course, that is true, but the chances of you breaking down are much, much lower, because there are so many fewer components inside the vehicle when compared with a internal combustion car, that they're just so fewer parts on the car to break. Then number 4 is if you run out of charge, it will take longer to get you going again, because obviously you need to wait for one of the specialized vans, as we have currently discussed. Then an important one, in the winter, you will have less range and it will be slower charging. So even if you have a fast charging car, if you in the summer were to use, let's say, 20 minutes to go from 20% charge to 85%, in the winter, that 20 minutes would easily become 40 minutes. So you have to allow more time to charge the car, even on a fast charger. Then the 6th one is becoming less relevant now, but it is nevertheless the case that the residual values for the earlier cars is not as good as a typical equivalent internal combustion engine car. And that is because people are aware that with the degradation of the battery packs, if you have a 100-mile range or an 80-mile range, if that degradation has taken place over the last 4 or 5 years, that range may well have gone down to 60 miles. And of course, that's less useful when compared with the currently available vehicles. So that is something to bear in mind. Although with the more modern vehicles, for example, the later Kias and the Tesla Model 3s, they hold their value extremely well. They appear to be much higher in value after 2 years, for example, when compared with the earlier models. So I think that, you know, it's changing. It's a moving feast. And then finally, 2 extra ones, which are not on the list, but and I'm sorry they're not on there, but I'm telling you anyway. When you are in an electric vehicle, there is such thing as you can get iced. And that is an expression that is a situation where you come to your charger, and then you find that some guy with a petrol or diesel car has parked his car in that very conveniently available empty bay in a busy car park, and he is now sitting in the place where you would normally, you know, get your charger. So what I have done with mine, and I've done this all the time now, I have bought an extension lead, and then I parked my car in front of his car and put my extension lead onto the charge post, and now he is EV'd and I still get my charge. So that is a real, that can be a real problem. The other thing to remember with an electric vehicle in general, if, for example, you have your own off-road parking and you think, okay, you know, I'm making a journey, you're tired, you want to, you know, get home, and you come indoors, and, you know, your brother rings up and says, I've got an emergency, come and get me. Well, if you're on zero charge, you cannot get in the car and get going. You will need time then on the home charger to get going. So you may have to take a taxi. It is an inconvenience sometimes, and it happens very, very rarely, but nevertheless, it is important to know that and to account for that if that situation occurs. Okay, so as I promised, we're just talking a little bit now about electrical energy in general and renewable energy in particular, and what can be done. So today, I don't know why. I seem to have lost all my little symbols. I don't know what happened there, but if I go, can you see the cursor? Can you all see the cursor? Okay, so if we take today what is possible, well, we're generating electricity with a wind generator, a solar panel. We can put that both into a common bus. It's a collector, if you like. And then, oops, I don't know why that happened. And we can then, with the help of this central controller, we can then put that we can then put that energy into an external battery pack and store that energy. Because one of the problems that can occur is that if the sun doesn't shine, your solar panel at night will not charge and will not give you electricity. But if in the day you have taken the energy from the solar panel and put it in a battery, you can then overnight use that energy and the next day recharge it again. So in the future, you will see systems that are localized systems, whereby we have a controller here, and this controller can communicate via the internet with your energy provider. And your energy provider is giving you energy from the grid. So you can choose between the grid, your battery, or even a portable gas-powered generator, or a wind generator, or a solar panel. All these things can begin to work together. And in the future, what we will see is that more and more of the energy generated can actually be traded. So you can sell the energy to the providers, because they also will look at the increase in the demand for electricity and will look for sources where they can get that electricity from. Now, how does that work? Well, if you imagine that by 2045, which is not that far away, the car park would be, let's say, roughly 85% electric. That would mean that on average, in the UK alone, you would have 42 terawatts of energy sitting in battery packs in cars alone, never mind home storage or any other means of storing energy. And that is, to give you a flavor of how much that is in terms of overall energy, the background energy required to keep our grid stable is only 12 terawatt nationally. So 42 terawatt in battery packs can be, at least 50% of that can readily be accessed almost instantaneously by allowing central control of the resource. So your utility can literally switch on your battery pack and say, okay, I'm going to take 10 or 15 kilowatt out of your battery pack instantaneously for the next hour or so. And then afterwards, you simply charge back up again overnight on your cheap rate. So the trading of electricity across a trading floor will be made more possible and will be one of the features why we don't have to worry about is there going to be enough electricity? You know, will the grid cope? The grid will cope easily. It is reckoned that 35% of all the electric cars will be charged overnight. And that will be good for the grid anyway, because today, the background electricity at night is much lower. And therefore, in the morning, when we're all putting our kettles on and getting to have our showers, then the demand will go up. And the power generators have to quickly ramp up their power stations to provide that electricity, and that's a very inefficient way of doing it. So the smaller we can make a difference between the lower levels of electricity and the highest output, the more efficient it becomes for everybody. So having that capacity to do that will be a big bonus for us and will allow everybody to have the electricity that they want. So what would that look like? Well, as you already saw, that is where it will be at. So you have your EV, you've got your solar power on your roof, you have your home storage battery. All the electrical appliances are made to be more efficient so that they will only take energy at the right time when the electricity is at its best and at its most available. And if not, then you know, you will rely on your home storage for the rest. And this is the way it's going to go into the future. And it will mean that although we will generate overall more electricity when compared with today, there will be more than plenty for everybody to use. Electricity itself, whether it's generated clean or not, is a very good medium of getting things powered up. So for example, to decarbonize our world, we will all have to convert to electric boilers. This is inevitable because boilers are approximately 18 to 20% of our carbon output nationally on the domestic and semi-domestic front. Industrially, that is another 20%. So there's a big chunk of our current carbon output that can be mitigated by moving it to electrical power instead of gas. So that's where that is at. I realized whilst I was looking at my notes that I forgot to mention the aspects of the hybrid versus the EV versus the hybrids, and I think it's important to just come back to that. I'm sorry about that. Many people have always asked me, well, I'm not so confident about electric vehicles, the ranges, you know, it's still an issue. If I have an engine, at least, you know, I can still make my way by putting some petrol in the tank or diesel. And this is true. I do not deny that that is the fact. However, in decarbonizing our world, we have to start thinking about the embedded energy. With the hybrid vehicle, why would I always now, today at least anyway, advise against the hybrid? That is because the hybrid is an essentially inefficient vehicle, because you're either running on electrical power and you're lugging all this engine and gearbox and bits around, which on average is 120 kilos of weight. So that's the weight of 1.5 person constantly in the car. Secondly, because the hybrid is a two-system vehicle, the so-called component count, the number of bits in the car, are much, much greater, nearly 3 times as many components when compared with a battery electric vehicle. So it is more than likely to become more troublesome in its later life because there are just so many more bits, and you're not really benefiting from the efficiency overall, because it has been proven already that the numbers that the manufacturers are outputting do not bear any relation to the reality of consumption that the real world will impose on a hybrid vehicle. So for me now, particularly having gone into that in quite some detail, hybrids are pushed very hard, as you're all aware. Every TV advert now is about a so-called self-charging vehicle, and this is a completely nonsensical charge. There's no such thing as a self-charging vehicle. You're using the petrol or diesel to charge the battery. It's an incredibly inefficient chain. It's only 12% efficient, so using a lot of fuel to charge something indirectly is really, really carbon intensive and unnecessary, particularly with today's battery technology and the cars available. They're pushing hybrids very hard because all the established OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, they are all very much still hoping that they can waylay what they call the evil day. For them, the evil day is the day that there are no more internal combustion engines allowed, because they will lose their competitive position. Because everybody that can make an electric vehicle, the on cost of starting an electric vehicle company is about 1/10, maybe 1/15 the cost of setting up an internal combustion engine type of manufacturing establishment. So they have a very strong position, which they don't want to give up naturally. They have invested a lot in the infrastructure. So they are pushing the hybrids very hard because it still involves having a gearbox, an engine, and all those bits. And that allows them to stay in the game. But I think for many of them, putting a lot of energy and effort into advertising them is the only hope they've got to persuade people that it's a good thing to do. But it is a false message. I urge you for yourself to look at that, and you will see that this is not the case at all. It's an unfortunate fact that they have a lot of money to advertise it, but we need to learn that if you look at the carbon commitment, there is no question that a hybrid is a false dawn. Anyway, that's that. I just thought that I missed that out, and you ought to know about it, because it's a question often asked in the process. Okay, well, I hope that you have enjoyed that, and I'm happy to take questions. I'll now. Okay, so Robin Strange is asking, what is the impact to the life of the batteries when fast charged, and are they 3-phase, and how is the quoted range calculated? Okay, there's a lot of questions within that. Okay, so let me address the fast charging first. The fast charging, when done at the correct temperature, has no noticeable effect on the degradation at all. Where fast charging has had a very bad reputation is in people, if you like, overriding the car's control system and bypassing it, and then the electrodes overheat, and that ages the batteries very, very badly, and in fact often damages them, and is a case where battery fires can occur. So if it's done at the correct rate, in association with the manufacturer specification, Fast charging has not. I fast charged all, well, 63,000 miles. I had 255 miles was my top range capacity. If I did it today to a full charge, I'm down now to 242. So I've lost 13 miles over 3 years in range capacity. So it's quite doable. It's really, I would say, about a 10-year period before the battery would be at a point where the range would be down to maybe 200 or below. And even at 200, it's not a problem. Then you made a comment about the degradation of the battery in reference to residual value, but how big an issue is it in normal operation? Well, in a way, I've answered that just now, but just to reiterate, if you lose, let's say 15, 20 miles of range over a period of 8 years or so, that's something that cannot be avoided. So the car will be worth less as a result. But in terms of operation, in other words, day-to-day use, you have lost that mileage. It won't come back. But the car is still perfectly usable. And clearly, if the mileage is 60 miles, your normal range was 60 miles, and then losing 20% of that would be a huge and impractical thing. But if you have 250 miles and you're then down to 200, it doesn't really, I very seldom go to full charge anyway, just because, well, you don't need to, there's no point in having that energy sitting there when you're not using it. So, I tend to charge in relation to what I think I'm going to use in terms of my travel. Hybrid and IC is unreliable, so why should we believe the same details of EVs? Well, the EV operating and range cycles are twofold. There's a real world WLTP one, which has been thoroughly tested and is, as the name implies, a real world test. So since there is no exhaust gas fallout, you're not having to worry about the effects of the amount of carbon that you are emitting. That's the only thing that one has to worry about. So I don't see that there's anything unbelievable about a manufacturer quoting a real world range, because many of the magazines have shown that if you then go about your business in a different way, you get more consumption. But that's the same with a petrol car. If you go and drive like a lunatic and accelerate all the time and are constantly on the accelerator and the brake, your consumption can easily drop by 30–35%. So if you normally have 30 to the gallon, it's very easy in town in particular to get down to 18 miles to the gallon, because you're sitting still idling all the time with the engine, and then you're accelerating fast and decelerating. So that amount of energy used will cost just as much in a petrol car as it would in an EV. If you behave in an EV like that, you use the energy more and faster. That is an inevitable result of the fact that you're accelerating a heavy lump of metal in both cases, and that takes a lot of energy to do so. Robert Silcox, yeah. Is there further scope for collecting energy from the EVs, recoverable brakes, etc.? It's a good question, and Roland. The answer is yes. There are now there's great work going on in changing the braking system on electric vehicle. There are some legislation issues at the moment, but there is more energy to be gathered. And also, of course, a more recent development is that for the first time, we have seen electric vehicles start to appear that have solar panels on board, built into the bodywork. Volvo has been doing that now, and a company in Holland, I'm proud to say, called Lightyear, are building a car that can use solar energy. Camper, oh yeah, and then from Jane. Very interesting talk and informative. Thank you, Jane. What about camper vans? Now, yes, a very interesting question, because camper vans are rather unique in that you're using a lot of energy in just when you're standing still. So you'd ideally like that capacity, and they are particularly suitable for onboard solar panels. If the roof, for example, that often goes up on the vans, could be included could include solar panels. That would help a lot. But there's no reason in the world why a camper van should not be made electric. Indeed, Volkswagen have just, with the ID.3 platform, announced that they will actually produce a Volkswagen bus for that specific purpose. So that is coming. Right, so Stefan, Stefan is asking, there is not enough space in town centers and cities for everyone to use an EV car. What is the sustainable solution to this problem? Well, you're right. The fact that you're changing to electric vehicles does not make for more space in the city. So you're still facing that space occupation problem, clearly. However, what you have begun to see already is that people have found, novel ways around it with these new electric scooters that you can buy, where they are scooting along, and legislation is coming towards making them subject to legislation and regulate them more. Because you're dead right, even if everybody had an EV, congestion would not change. In fact, it might even increase. So, the councils have to start taking back roads, making people, incentivize people to go on bikes, electric bikes and electric scooters, and take back some of that space that cars traditionally have taken up. And cars are a damn nuisance. I'm a car man, I'm a petrol head, but I can tell you now that I can see very clearly that if you had an empty street with no cars in it, the children would come out. There'd be more external activities in the road amongst people. So, for a long time, we've suffered from cartitis, which is a dreadful disease where all the cars are taking up loads of space, and they're not really sitting there usefully, because they're just lumps of metal doing nothing. So I'm in favor of town centers without cars. If you go to Hanover, for example, in Germany now, the center of town, no cars, nil cars. You have to walk everywhere, or you go with a tram and on the little scooters. Paris is going to go there shortly, so it's coming. That's I hope that answers that question. D. Kershaw, what is the environmental impact of mining the exotic materials to make the batteries? And what is the end-of-life position for used batteries? Well, that's a very good question there. The environmental impact of exotic metals is poor. There's no denying that. We haven't learned to apply carbon reduction methodology to mining. We've also not learned how to do that electrically, so that still needs to happen. And there are moves along that way. But at the moment, lithium exploration, you may have heard that more recently, in Cornwall, we have found sources for lithium, and because of the price, it becomes more economically viable to look for lithium. So we may well see some of that happening in Cornwall, where we then have an opportunity to apply more modern recovery methods. The end-of-life position for used batteries is actually quite good. Already, as I speak, Nissan and Renault have a depot in Amsterdam and one in Paris, where the old batteries are taken in and converted into domestic storage batteries. Very efficient. It has to do with the fact that the car batteries are designed to discharge large chunks of energy in a very short space of time. Domestic batteries, on the other hand, can do it very slowly. So you can charge them very slowly and you discharge them slowly. The maximum load you might get on a domestic battery might be 10 or 12 kilowatt. In a car, it can be 250 kilowatt instantaneously. So you can use car-based traction batteries for domestic purposes very well. And indeed, Nissan and Renault are doing that at the moment, and Tesla too. If you buy a Tesla home battery system, you will probably find that over 40% of those batteries are ex-car batteries, reused for that purpose. And they will be good for the next 15, 20 years easily, if not longer, because of the way in which they have to operate in the home scenario. So Mike Jones, thanks for a really interesting talk. Well, thank you, Mike. There's a problem with EV silence and problems for pedestrians. Any progress about this? Yes, indeed. It's a very, very good point. And when you own an EV, there are two conditions that you really have to be careful about. One is maneuvering inside garages, shopping centers and malls like that. People do not hear you sometimes because of background noise. And the other is the situation where you are driving slowly along the road behind bicyclists and motorbikes. They will not hear you. So the onus is on you then to really take care about where you go and how you go. There are moves afoot now. The new Zoe, the latest Zoes, all have what they call a slow speed humming mode. And as the car goes along, you get a kind of musical tone that comes from the car, that you can hear emanating from the car to warn people around the car that, you know, something is approaching. And it usually works quite well. So yes, you're absolutely right. It is a problem. It should have been on my list of downsides, actually, but I missed that one. So I'm very grateful for that little prompt there. Oh, really? Bob Adams there. Whoa. You were involved with the Enfield car. Well, that's a very, very interesting thing. Yes, for those of you that don't know, the Enfield car was one of the very, very early 70s electric vehicles in this country, where a Greek gentleman had invested some money in a Hillman Imp-based little electric vehicle with about 40 or 50 miles of range on ordinary lead-acid batteries. A very good effort, but unfortunately, as with many others that followed, it was just too early. People would not believe it, you know. In general, people are not aware that electric cars existed well before the combustion car did. Dr. Porsche, in fact, designed and developed a fully working electric vehicle with 4 wheel-based motors that could do 50 miles an hour, 50 miles in range, again on lead-acid batteries, and was super reliable and known to be so. So, you know, it started very early. Robin Strange, there are many streets in Worthing and most other towns where people cannot park near their house. So what is the answer? Well, that is, the answer here is that, you know, you need more fast chargers in and around the city. It is coming. People have realized now that that is the answer. Where you simply go to a petrol station. In fact, BP have said that they will convert the old ones now instead of shutting them down. They will put, say, 15 or 20 fast chargers there. Each fast charger has 2 outlets, so you can charge 30 cars at the same time at high charge rates. High charge meaning more than 50 kilowatt. So that is the solution, and it does work. It has been modeled by the Department of Transport how that could work, and there is no question that it can be done. Okay, so Robin Strange here, electric motorcycles are now being marketed. What sort of range can be packed into a motorcycle? At the moment, it's still modest. It's about between 80 and 100 miles. So you can fast charge them now, the later ones. So it is getting better, but it is still fairly limited because of the way in which the batteries are packed into the bike. You just don't have the same space as you would have typically in even a fairly small car. Can easily have a 40 kilowatt battery pack. And a current 40 kilowatt battery pack at about 3.5 miles per kilowatt would give you 120-ish, 140 miles. So yes, it's still a bit behind. But then if you reckon that most people only travel average 30, 35 miles per day, you know, maybe a motorbike for shorter distances is perfectly acceptable. Maybe not for the long runs. Silly question. No, there are no silly questions, Jane. How much does it cost to charge up on a motorway? Well, it's a good question. There are different contractors. I would strongly recommend that if you're looking at this as a reality, then get a little phone app called Zap Map. Zap Map will tell you where all the charging stations are. There are on average 8 contractors that have charging stations scattered all over the place, and it ranges from 21 pence per kilowatt right up to 40 pence per kilowatt, because if you charge very fast, you get charged a much higher rate. So that's the range of charging costs, particularly on motorways, for example, whereas you know the fuels are always more expensive. So I hope that answers that question. Malcolm Wright here, how is supercapacitor being used in EVs? Does it have a significant future? A very good question, Malcolm. The answer is probably not. There is a point of convergence between supercapacitors and batteries, and we're rapidly approaching the point where the discharge rates of batteries gets to come very close to the supercapacitor, and then there just isn't any point in having a supercapacitor because it cannot store the volume of energy when compared with a battery. So slowly, over the last 8 or 9 years, the advance in battery technology and the ability to discharge large quantities of current has meant that the supercapacitor has become less necessary, let's put it that way. There is one aspect of supercapacitors that is very interesting, and that is that they are what they call dry electrode devices. And that is the future of new battery technology as well. So there's a crossover there between the technology of the supercapacitor morphing into the traction battery technology. So that is already happening. Oh yeah, people have asked about hydrogen cars. That's a general question that it doesn't feature here, but I'll just cover that because I meant to cover it and I didn't. People have asked me, okay, well, you know, is it going to be is hydrogen the future? You know, will that overcome our range anxiety problems with batteries? And the answer now is becoming more and more clear. Hydrogen-powered passenger vehicles is probably not going to happen, not at any scale anyway. And the reason is quite simple. A fuel cell is a notoriously difficult thing to make work in a transient environment. And that's an expensive word for saying something that needs to go up and down all the time. As you drive your car in town, you press the accelerator, you let go, you brake, you accelerate, you brake, you accelerate. In any given time, for example, a typical urban period of 5 minutes, you may easily have 50 to 70 changes of state with a throttle pedal as you move with the traffic. As a result of that, the fuel cell has to react to that, and it doesn't like doing that. It likes to work, it likes to get up to a certain temperature and then stay there and output a certain constant energy. And so you have to then have a battery pack in between the fuel cell and the electric motor. Well, then you might as well have a battery pack and do away with the fuel cell. So slowly, the battery pack has become more and more capable, making it less and less necessary for a fuel cell to be there. Hydrogen fuel cells do have a function in trains and probably planes even, as well as trucks, long distance trucks. There are some ways in which that can be done usefully. And of course, hydrogen can be used as a transition fuel and a time shift fuel. In a transition fuel, hydrogen can be used to be injected into the gas grid to reduce the emissions from gas grid by 20%, 25% comfortably to lower our carbon profile. And as a time shift fuel, you can generate hydrogen with an electrolyzer from your solar panel. You can store that hydrogen in a tank and then connect it to a fuel cell and produce electrical energy again. It is an inefficient chain, but it does allow you to then get electricity at a time you want, rather than when the solar panels or the wind generator can supply it. So in these two functions, there is still a clear position for hydrogen. Hydrogen, of course, is used in all sorts of different places for medical purposes and in the chlor-alkali industry, for example, as an industrial cleaner, and the medical field as well. So hydrogen will not go away. It is the most abundant element on Earth. It's also the smallest, and that makes it uniquely difficult to deal with in the car world, because if you want a volume of hydrogen for 200 miles, for example, would be a tank of roughly 70 liters in capacity, and you would need 700 bar pressure in order to get that mileage out of that tank. Well, to have a tank at 700 bar is a very, very high pressure. And to get that hydrogen into that tank already consumes 25% of the total energy of that tank to get it in there. And then you can't store it in an enclosed space, so you can't put it in your garage. And in the summer, you'll be venting a lot because the expansion rate of the hydrogen through the temperature rise is so great that you lose another 25% over 10 days. So you put a full tank down, 10 days later, you're at half a tank and you haven't gone anywhere. So there are a number of really quite granular issues with the use of hydrogen. and the fuel cell. So hence, I don't think, frankly, that hydrogen cars do exist. I've built several myself, but it is not going to last as a personal transport. How soon can we expect long-range EV delivery vans? Malcolm Wright asked that. Well, it's happening. I'm very pleased to say that we have a company here in near Banbury called Arrival. You can look them up on the internet. They are a new company. And a complete startup, but very advanced, and they're making a very beautiful and very efficient electric van that can comfortably do 200 miles in range if you buy the right the right type of it. And so it's I think it's either Google or not Google. No, Amazon, sorry. Amazon have ordered 500 of them for, in this country, inner city delivery. So it's a good step forward. And then Mercedes-Benz have recently announced they're doing it, Vauxhall, and also, what's the names? Renault. So it is happening. Well, I hope that has answered a lot of the questions.